the way you speak to yourself is really important. So you are with yourself 24/7, 365. And I've read studies where we have as many as 6,000 thoughts per day. And a lot of that is that inner voice talking to us and chattering. So if that gets negative and your inner critic is kind of blaring its nonsense over your PA system, you need to take note of that and say,
welcome to Learn or Be Learned. We either learn from others or others learn from us. The former is able to help us become a better, faster you. Follow me weekly as I dig up stories like a true anthropologist would on one of the 3 series called Guest Conversations, Book Applications, or my Small Talk Explorations. I'm your host, Shiva Danshaker, and let's talk. All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm here with Emily Sanders. Hey, Emily, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm Emily Sander, and I can go into my professional background, which would be I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and so Amazon and Microsoft were the big companies in that city. So I worked for both of them. I was actually one of the testers for the original Kindle device. So back before anyone knew what an e-reader was, I was testing that very first version, and I remember having to keep it secret from family and friends while I was doing that. And then it released right before Christmas, and I got to tell everyone that I had been working on that and trying to explain what a Kindle was to everyone. So did that.
What was your initial thoughts on that? Since it was like
I thought it was really cool. It was like the very first version, so very basic, and it had a whole bunch of formatting issues. But the concept, I was like, oh, interesting. So you don't have to carry a whole bunch of big books around. I can see how this would be useful for.
that's even better now because of textbooks and stuff. You can just download textbooks, so you don't have to carry like 6 textbooks to class.
Exactly. And for traveling and such. So I still have a Kindle now. So I'm proud that I got my little part of making that work and making that better. So that was a lot of fun. Went on from there to work for some startups. I was the smallest one was I was the 6th person at a startup. So that was a whole bunch of fun and learned a lot on that. I just moved my way up through various companies. I built the client management team from scratch. So a global client management team from scratch, which at the time was very new to me. Recruiting and hiring, especially in a foreign country, was brand new. I remember walking from our CEO's office when the order came in, like, Emily, go build international client management team, get client managers in region. And I walked back to my desk and Googled, how to hire someone in the UK, because I had no idea how to do that, but figured it out. And thankfully I got some great hires in region, and that went well. And then have, worked my way up to the executive team. And I currently serve as chief of staff, and I'm an advisor for our CEO and our leadership team at a small digital marketing agency we have here. And I'm also, of course, a life coach, business coach, and work with executives and business leaders from all around the world, kind of separately in my own practice.
So what exactly does a chief of staff do in this hierarchy of roles?
Yeah, so good question. So the way I like to describe it is, that little plastic thing that holds the 6 cans together when you buy soda? That's kind of the chief of staff. So they hold everyone together on the management team, on the leadership team. And that can be anything from spearheading large company-wide initiatives and making sure all of the departments have what they need and are working together, and also keep them accountable. And then I'm a soundboard for our CEO and also the other C-suite leaders. So basically, if they're having trouble with their teams, or they're kind of trying to think through the next few steps, if they make a strategic move over here, how is that going to affect the company in 6 months, or the different departments immediately? So kind of that trusted advisor and soundboard for a whole bunch of different things. So kind of it's very much coaching in a way. So there's definitely some overlap there.
What are some lessons you learned through the years? Because, you've learned a lot about leadership and hiring process, and what to look for in a person that is going to be right for the job. So what advice would you give for people that are maybe smaller businesses, or new to the game, and are trying to hire someone for the first time, maybe it's the first person they've ever hired on their team, what do they look for?
Yeah, yeah. So there's a couple ways to answer that. The first one is when recruiting and hiring, you kind of look at two big buckets. So the first one is aptitude, and the
Mm-hmm.
second one is attitude. So the first one is the hard skills you would need for the job. So do they have, the coding experience, or can they, code in Python or C sharp or
Mm-hmm.
whatever you need? If they're an accountant, do they have, the CPA credentials, et cetera, et cetera? The second bucket, which is attitude, is basically do they fit in well with the
Mm-hmm.
company culture and team culture? And would they work well with you? Basically, if they're going, oh, Emily's our new hire, and people, get to work on a group project with her, do they cringe when they have to work with Emily? Or they're like, oh, no, she's cool. She knows what she's doing and she's nice to work with. So I've heard that another way to think about that. I've heard it called the brilliant jerk or the friendly incompetent. So, you might be really friendly and lovely to work with, but, you don't have the hard skills. Conversely,
Mm-hmm.
you might know what you're doing and be very knowledgeable, but no one wants to work with you. So, the ideal candidate would be a top performer in both categories, in both buckets. So,
Mm-hmm.
that's something to look for. For startups, there's kind of this X factor quality where you get to wear many hats and you're adaptable and you can kind of multitask and switch back and forth between things really quickly. So in a new company like that, that skill is what you want to look for, because that's going to kind of lead into different things where someone can keep up with the pace, and you're usually working at a very frenetic, fast pace, and they also can do a whole bunch of different things. So at that stage, I would say, unless you need a specialist for some particular reason, look for a generalist who can jump into a whole bunch of different things and do that well.
Yeah, I would agree. I think adaptability would be a really, really powerful quality to have, especially in a startup, right? With that, because I feel like that's still, there's still moments where you have to, it can be difficult, right, to find the right people. What struggles have you noticed within group dynamics that you maybe wouldn't expect when you're starting out, that are important in finding people or finding a team that works together well?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is we're all individuals and we view the world differently and we communicate differently. So those are big pieces to keep in mind, especially when you're sometimes spending more time with these folks than your family. Um, so I kind of talk about in my book, Hacking Executive Leadership, we all have a lens through which we see the world and through which we interpret, events or experiences. And it's almost like wearing a contact lens. So if you have a contact lens in, everything you see is tinted by that lens. And
Hmm.
sometimes you forget that it's on. So your set of beliefs or values about the world is your lens in this case. And everything that's coming in is interpreted or filtered through that lens. And so you could be sitting at a team meeting, for instance, and you could have five other people around that table. And that team meeting and what happens in that team meeting, you could get five different descriptions of how that went or what happened, because everyone's viewing it from their own vantage point. So taking some time to be self-aware and try to understand, hey, how am I seeing the world? Are there certain things that trigger me? Are there certain things that give me energy or drain me of energy? Kind of what's my filter? And then understanding and being aware that the person you're speaking with will have a different lens. It might be similar, but everyone's unique and has their own background and experience. So what's their lens? How are they seeing, this situation and this team meeting? So that's something to keep in mind. And there's ways I work with my coaching clients on kind of discovering some of their lenses or hidden beliefs, because sometimes you don't know them. They are inherited from childhood. So that's a big one. The other thing I would say with any team, big or small, is communication. So we have such different communication styles. Some people prefer very direct, very straightforward, don't beat around the bush, just give it to me straight communication. And that works for them. They can hear what you need to hear, they get the information they need. And other people need a little more nuance and need you to be a little bit gentler and kind of maybe pad it with some positive things that they're doing. And that's what works for them. So, figuring out, hey, I might like to be communicated in a certain way. I might need certain information to move forward, but my team member might need something very different. So, do I know their communication style, and can I flex to what they need? And as a leader, it's your job to flex to what your team members need. So don't always expect people to say, it's the boss's way or the highway. No, 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 no. If you're a leader, one of your jobs is to make sure your team members are performing at their best and serving them the best you can.
Oh man, don't I know it? Because I'm more direct, and I've definitely experienced my direct advice is not taken well because it wasn't padded. And I just want to ask a follow up with that. Do you think the best approach when you don't, because when you know somebody, you know how to approach whether they need to be a little bit more soft, like
Hmm.
with it, or just right direct to the point. When you don't know somebody, it's like the first time. Do you is the approach probably just to go a little bit more gentle first, and then kind of get to know them, and then like okay, they just take things directly?
Yeah, it's a good question. If you had to pick out of those two, I would probably default on the quote unquote softer approach, just because if you happen to have the mismatch where you're super direct and they prefer kind of a softer approach, you could send them into a tailspin without meaning to.
Mm,
The other thing that I tell people is ask. Ask someone. Say, hey, I have some information to share. Can I share some feedback with you? What kind of things would be helpful for you here? Um, that's a good way. And if it's the very first meeting with someone, you kind of have to, just do your best with it, or just kind of say, hey, apply common sense. What do I think is going to
yeah.
be best in this situation? But going forward, one of the things you can and should be doing as a leader is observing your team members and saying, hey, how do they show up in different scenarios? What do they seem like they respond well to? And in your one-on-ones, I certainly encourage people um, to just ask them, because people love being asked, like, hey, like, what level of information would you like in these scenarios? And how what works best for you in terms of feedback? Like, those are great questions. If I get those
Hmm.
from my boss, then I love that.
It's a little comforting to hear from someone who's been doing business and has a lot of experience, that my values are two of them at least are adaptability and communication, which I think is very important, especially when it comes to teamwork, business, whatever it is, even relationships, family, everything, right? It's very important qualities to have, and it's very comforting to hear someone also reassure me like, yeah, those are very good qualities that you should enact. In what are a couple other big values that will go a long way in business or elsewhere?
Yeah. A big one is how you approach failure, and I put that in quotes. So everyone in life is going to quote unquote fail at something, or not do as well as they would have liked. And if you think about failure as a series of loops, so a series of loops and the big chain of them goes up and to the right, that's a good way to think about it. So each failure event is one individual loop. And so there is a point where you're going backwards and you're going the opposite direction you want to go. That's the point where it feels really crappy and you're like, oh my goodness, I messed up on that presentation, or oh my goodness, that decision didn't go the way I wanted it. And in that moment, if you understand where you are and also take the learning and take the lesson out of that and apply it going forward, you've then transformed failure into progress, because that's just learning at that point. So it feels really crappy and it's easier said than done. But if you just have that framework or concept in mind, it is helpful. But shoot, this didn't work out the way I wanted, but let me reflect on it for a little bit and take the meaning or the lesson out of it and make sure I apply it next time and do a little better. And you've just improved yourself and you've just grown. So I think that's key in business and in life. I think it has application there. The other thing is that I that I talk a lot about with my colleagues at work and also my coaching clients is the way you speak to yourself is really important. So you are with yourself 24/7, 365. And I've read studies where we have as many as 6,000 thoughts per day. And a lot of that is that inner voice talking to us and chattering. So if that gets negative and your inner critic is kind of blaring its nonsense over your PA system, you need to take note of that and say, hey, am I talking to myself in a way that's going to help me and is in a way that's encouraging? One of the questions I ask folks is, hey, would you say to a friend, your best friend who you want to do well and you want good things to happen for that person, would you dream of saying that to your friend? And most people are like, no, I would never say that to a friend or a stranger or anyone else out loud. Yet they say it to themselves all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So taking inventory of how you're speaking to yourself. Um, some exercises you can do are pick 3 words that you want to be and how you want to show up. And those might be not how you are today, but maybe one step ahead of where you are, or kind of, the vision you have for yourself. And just say them to yourself throughout the day, in the morning when you first wake up, kind of when those negative thoughts come up, catch it and go, oh, that's time to flip over into my, encouraging, supportive highlight reel channel for myself and play
Mm-hmm.
that instead. um, and those can work pretty well. You can also pair that with, for instance, a doorway kind of check. So if you walk through a certain door in your house or where you live, or if you're in office now and you want to make sure, hey, every time I leave or enter this certain room, I want to make sure I remember X, Y, and Z. Just put a little habit in there. Like every time I cross through this doorway, for instance, a conference room, I had a CEO use this. Every time I enter this conference room for my team meeting, he had 3 words that he said to himself to remember how he wanted to show up as a leader in that meeting. So that's something folks can use as well.
I like that. I think you talk about, I guess, essentially the mental health of like self-concept. It sounds like is really important, right? So you have your, I think people are often their hardest critics on themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and you have your ideal self, what you think you want to be, versus your actual self, and then that the bigger the difference, the harder you are on yourself, and that affects your self-esteem, your self-concept. And I like the ideas you bring up about, repeating to yourself things that you want to be, good habits, and things that you can do for that. Because I think it can get really difficult to drown out the negative thoughts in your head once it starts rolling, especially. What what do you suggest you do when you start getting in that negative mindset? Should you write it down? What's a good way to take a step back and be like, okay, maybe I'm being too hard on myself. How can you flip the switch?
Yeah. So it's helpful to kind of understand a little bit how your brain works. So, for instance, a lot of people have had a negative thought for a long time. And so that kind of makes a groove in your brain, so to speak. You think of a river making a groove in the ground. And so your job is to make a new groove and say, hey, I have to build a path over here for this new positive or even neutral thought. If you're going, from way negative, just bring it to neutral might be a good interim step. So every time you catch yourself thinking that negative thought, you need to flip over into something new, and build that new pathway. So the first step with almost anything is awareness. So being aware that is happening. It's really hard to kind of address something or go a different direction if you can't even notice it's happening. So the first step is just for a week or even a month, just kind of be more cognizant and observe your own thoughts. Think about what you're thinking about and don't place any judgment on it. Just say, oh, there's that negative thought that's coming up. Sometimes labeling it helps. So, oh, there's that I can't do it thought, or there's that worry thought, and labeling it kind of puts it at arm's distance or puts it in front of you so you can handle it versus like, oh, it's like kind of part of me or it's in me. So those are probably the first couple steps. Um, The other thing that I'm actually working with my coach on, because I have a team of coaches, is just unplugging from that construct altogether. So I kind of think about it like Neo in The Matrix, the movie The Matrix. And basically, your reality is the matrix, and it's constructed by a whole bunch of beliefs and lenses and things like that. And sometimes that negative thought, if I have something pop up, it's my cue to just unplug, like literally that kind of needle they put in the back of their neck. I just envision that unplugging and kind of things dissolving where that's not even real. That's just something you've made up in your head. And so I kind of unplug from the matrix and it's like, oh, I'm not giving it any weight and significance. I'm not giving it any attention to try to resist it because that gives it power. I'm simply unplugging and saying that's a construct. I'm here now, present, and that's really helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also with the cognizant thing, I think it'd also be a good idea to maybe try to make a calendar or like a journal and just kind of like note down when you feel those type of moods or thoughts or whatever. Whether that's you could do like several times throughout the day, like okay, every 4 hours I'll check in and just see like how I feel or what I'm thinking, or just kind of have a calendar and mark down when you're starting to feel those thoughts. I think is also a good way to kind of take a step back after a month and be like, okay, I've been thinking this for like 2 straight weeks, you know.
That's a great idea because you can also find patterns. So a
Hmm.
lot of times people are like, oh, once I have this data from this journal, there's a certain person that does this, or a certain type of person, or an event that'll kind of trigger this. And so having that is super helpful to kind of dig in a little bit deeper and say, what's going on behind that? What's coming up for me
Yeah.
when that comes up? So yeah, I love that.
Also, I wanted to ask when we talked about failure, was this in reference to the, failure loop in your book, Hacking Executive Leadership, right?
It was, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay. And with that, I also know that we talked about the term swizzle, and it intrigued me because I didn't know what swizzle was, at least in the terms of your book. So, do you want to, mention what that is a little bit? I think the reader or the audience would benefit from that.
Yeah, for sure. So the reason you haven't heard the term swizzle is because I made it up. It just kind of popped out one day. And it's another concept and framework that people can use. So an easy example is, let's say you're putting a PowerPoint presentation together with a whole bunch of slides, and you've done 3 previous PowerPoint presentations that have somewhat related material. So you grab the best slides from each of them and then reorder them, reformat it, make sure it's consistent, and you have a brand new slide deck. So you've taken the best from multiple different areas and made a brand new um, deck that's relevant and useful for what you're going to use it for going forward. So if you expand that concept to different things, and we talked about one, so adaptability, I was actually listening to a podcast with Floyd Mayweather, and the interview was asking them like, "Hey, what makes you such a great boxer? You're top of your game. You're so quick. You're so fit." And he basically said, "It's my adaptability that makes me the best boxer." So every round is different. Every opponent is different. Every punch is different, and my ability to adapt in the moment is what makes me a champion. And I was like, oh my goodness, when I heard that, I was like, oh, there's something to this. I'm not a boxer in any way, shape, or form, but I can apply this to business and to life. So um, if you look at the different areas of your life and kind of take the best things out of each one and apply them to what's relevant to you now, it's a way to be resourceful and it's a way to be a creative problem solver. So I always kind of I walk through that in my book, and I work with my clients on that a lot because they can often apply a lesson from over here or lift and shift kind of the spirit of something and say, "Oh my gosh, like that can actually apply in this area of life." So it's a good thing to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, I would agree because you know Floyd is one of the best boxers, and you would think, I mean, what he says sounds so intuitive, but in the moment, because you have to also think, it's like, oh yeah, adaptability. Like every round is different. Of course, you want to fight and differently, But in the moment, it can also get really hard to remember that because when you're zoned in or you're everything's happening so quickly, it's always easier in hindsight or from, taking a step back. But, whether that's business and you're something's happened, something's gone wrong, you got to fix it. You only have like an hour. Thinking like, okay, well, let's take a step back and see how we can approach it differently can sometimes
Yeah.
get fogged by the thought of, oh no, I have an hour, you know? So yeah, adaptability is incredible.
Yeah, and I didn't expect him to say that, nor did you could tell the interview was like, you're so strong or you train a certain way, and he was like, no. In the end of the day, it's my adaptability, and I was like, oh my gosh, 2020, everyone had to adapt. My goodness, and certainly if a server goes down and you have kind of an hour, ASAP to get it back up, how adaptable are you? So there's lots of different applications for that for sure.
Hmm. And so with, you know, your 15 years of experience learning about leadership and all that, is this what kind of brought you to, because you mentioned you have coaches, several coaches, right? Where did that, so I've noticed this as a trend with people that are older and have more experiences, they tend to have more coaches and stuff. What are the benefits of the coaches that once you've started having coaches you noticed in yourself, and why do people have coaches?
Yeah. So the reason I have coaches is it gets me to my goals faster. And it's really, really nice to have just an objective soundboard who their job is to, they're for me, and they encourage me and support me, but they also keep me accountable. So we talk about our goals and we co-create those. But if I've said, my goal is in this direction, and they observe that I'm doing something else or I'm going astray, then they'll call me on it and say, hey, Emily, we talked about this as your goal, yet you're doing this. What do you see about that, or what comes up for you? Have your goals changed? And even just having that space and time to talk to someone who is objective, who's trained to kind of listen, like, hey, I hear this theme coming up over and over again. What do you think about that? And it's something that I can't see myself. So if you think about a sports coach, I played basketball way back in the day. Our coaches would watch us at practice and say, do they need help with a certain shot? Or Emily gets really nervous before big games. Maybe we can work on her confidence and her mindset and some things mentally going into those big events. And same thing, I do that with my clients. So, hey, are you needing help prepping for a board meeting? Or, oh, you didn't get that managing director role you wanted, but you're up for it next year. You got some feedback from the partners on what you need to do. Let's put a game plan together and work on that. A lot of people struggle with confidence and feeling confident to make decisions, because as you move up, more and more decisions come your way, and they're often weightier decisions. They have more impact. So making sure you don't second guess yourself. But yeah, think of the easiest way to think of a business coach is think of a sports coach or a trainer, and you're basically doing similar things for a business leader, and you're helping them just get to their goals faster.
Hmm. And how do you find these coaches?
Yeah, well, I'm a coach myself, so there's a network of folks, and I've picked some up along the way. It's funny, one of my coaches used to be my instructor in coaching school, and she was one of my
Oh
favorite
wow.
instructors. And I was like, oh my goodness, I've graduated. I'm going to hire her. So I work with her, and she's fantastic. And she's from New York, so she's a very direct communicator, and so she just tells me like it is, which is amazing. But she can also see things where um, Emily, I've seen kind of um, you're kind of doing black and white thinking in this area. What comes up for you with that's like, oh my gosh, like yes, I'm like all or nothing, and there's usually some gray area in there.
Hmm.
Or if I'm worrying about something and overthinking something, it's a reminder like, hey, what is a good point to think this through, and what's a good point to stop thinking about it? Where like, hey, you've had evidence in the past that you do just fine on these presentations, or you do just fine when you're communicating this information. How much planning is prudent, and do you think you should do, and when do you think you should stop. And I'm like, I should have
Mm-hmm.
stopped, a week ago, but I'll do it now. So helping through some of those things is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to ask a couple questions, lastly, on advice on small businesses and stuff. But I wanted to ask real quick: was there anything else that you wanted to mention in what we've talked about, or anything that was kind of glossed over that we could go into a little bit?
I think we covered a lot. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of good stuff. And, another takeaway that your listeners can have is it's really important to set your intention at the beginning of the day. So we all go into our day and then we get sucked up by, emergencies and emails and phone calls and everything
Mm-hmm.
else. So I think it's really important to, when you wake up, take it, just literally, it could be 30 seconds, maybe a few minutes, just to kind of set your intention for the day. And that could be anything that works for you. So anything from writing or saying things that you're grateful for, just to kind of put your mind in that frame of mind, or what is my biggest priority for the day, or maybe top two, just so you set like, okay, if I get nothing else done today, what am I going to try to hit, and or kind of how do you want to show up. So that could be saying, again, what are the three words that I want to be or want to head toward, and just keep those in mind at the very beginning of the day. So it's like you've already made up your mind that I'm going to be this way or
Mm-hmm.
show up this way. You've already made up your mind that you're going to get these two things done today. And you've already made up your mind that, hey, I'm going to remember to be grateful for these three things, because sometimes throughout a day, it's like everything's going wrong and
Yeah.
nothing is going right. And I hate everything. So just kind of setting your mind and having that attention and intention at the beginning of the day is important.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, that's definitely very true. I've learned that the hard way, whether that's putting more on my plate than I can
Hmm.
handle, or you know when you get caught up in your day and you think, nothing's going right. Those are very important, and I've learned that if you put the one or two most important things that you're doing for the day and you accomplish those, to just kind of mentally tell yourself that you have had a successful day.
Yeah.
So anything else is extra, rather than saying, okay, I want to do 1 through 6 today. And you get through 1 through 3. And then you're like, I only did 50%. That's like an F. I only got 50% of the stuff done. And day after day after day. So that is important, and definitely waking up and setting your mind in the right attitude was something I also learned, because sometimes you wake up and you're in a rush, or you wake up, and if you don't, I don't know, you wake up and you're not in the right attitude, things don't flow as they should
Yep.
for you,
Yeah, for
I
sure.
feel like.
So just kind
Mhm.
of putting that intention. And you hit on something really important as well, which is give yourself credit for things you have done. So sometimes it feels like, oh my goodness, I haven't made progress on that project. But if you really stopped and wrote down what you've done in the last, 90 days, you're like, oh my gosh, I did a lot. So,
Mhm.
take a second to reflect on the things that you have done and the things that you have done well, and acknowledge yourself and give yourself credit for those.
Mhm. And so I guess lastly, to get into it, so the majority of my audience is around 20s to 40s, right? And so for those people who are interested in a side hustle or a small business or a startup, whether they've already started or are about to start and need some advice, what are some advice you would give for people that don't know how to, whether it's grow the business, start the business, things like that?
Yeah. I would say know what you're good at. So know your strengths and know what you're not good at, know your weaknesses, and build your team around your weaknesses. So, if you're really good at the strategic vision part, great. That's you. You need someone who can help with the tactical and practical implementation of your ideas and of your vision. Um, and that could be skill set, specialty as well. Hey, if you know a lot about, I don't know, you're a chiropractor and you're starting your own, practice, but you don't know a lot about the marketing pieces. Well, you go be a good chiropractor. Don't, try to become an expert at all the marketing. Find someone who knows how to do that and talk to them about your business. Make sure you work well with them, but then, get them on your team to work with
Mm-hmm.
you. So a lot of people try to stretch way outside of their comfort zone or their specialty, which does have to happen a little bit. But if you're going way outside and it's taking away from what you do really, really well, I would say there's lots of resources out there to help you part time or full time with some
Mm-hmm.
of those things.
With people that are, doing it as a part-time thing, maybe a side hustle, and they only can allocate a little bit of time, what is the benefit? Like, what should they focus on when they're starting a startup company, um, and need to get team members and stuff? So I guess two parts is, what do you focus on when you start mainly, and where do you find people? Is this through connections? Do you go and just message a ton of people, or is there, conventions that people meet at? They're like, okay, I should go there, and I'll find a ton of people that are good at coding or something, right?
Yeah. Okay. So the first part, I would say there's this concept called MVP, or minimally viable product, and it's used in technology cycles typically, or product release cycles, but it can be used for anything, and especially for startups. So what is your MVP? Meaning, what is your minimally viable product? So if you're building a service or building a product, what is the core of that? So you can release it and get feedback. It might not have all the features and functionality you want it to have, or it will eventually have, but get something that tests the concept out to market and say, okay, let me get some early adopters, let me get some beta testers and get some feedback, because the thought and intention you had of where the product should go and how it should be built might change. So you might think, oh,
Mm-hmm.
users want it to do this thing, and you get some feedback like, oh my goodness, I got to make it go over here. And so therefore, you haven't spent cycles on doing that. You've got your MVP out first, and then you can start iterating on it from there. So for any kind of entrepreneur or startup, I would say, what gives you the biggest bang for your buck, and what is good enough? And that's not a cop out for doing high quality work. It's literally, by definition, it's good enough for right
Mm-hmm.
now. So get that going. Don't let perfection. Perfection is the enemy of progress sometimes. So just get it done. Have a bias toward done, and then move from there. So that's the biggest thing that I see people get caught up with. Like, I have to have it all the way built, or I have to have it perfect and pitch perfect. And it's like, you need to get it out to market. You need to get some feedback. You need
Mm-hmm.
to get something going. And they've spent, months and months and months, and, tens of thousands of dollars, and they haven't actually done anything. So just get it out to market as soon as you can. Um, in terms of finding resources, all the methods you mentioned can work. So certainly work your network and connections. Hey, if you know someone, or your little cousin happens to do digital marketing, or your sister does can put together pamphlets or whatever you need, certainly leverage those folks. There's Fiverr and there's Upwork, platforms like that. If there's something that's specific to your industry, so if you are, I don't know, I'm making stuff up here, opening a massage school, there are like massage conventions
Mm-hmm.
to go there and network with people. And if there's any conferences, and a lot of them are virtual these days, so you don't have to go anywhere. You can just sign up and connect with people that way. So a whole bunch of different options. And of course, you can put an ad out for things. But a lot of the admin tasks can be offshored or nearshored, and that can be a great way. If you find a good talent there, you can have some high quality work, and it also is cost effective for you. So
Yeah.
I've had several clients, and I use myself some fantastic resources through Upwork and things like that, who I've found.
And like automating certain things is
Absolutely.
good too.
Yep.
Yeah. So lastly, I want to ask, for those of us that are, content creators, specifically, when I started, I didn't realize content creation kind of parallels with a small business. I would say, especially as you grow, because you build it, because the same thing, you find team members, you build a team, you gather people where your weaknesses are, and you do marketing team, whatever that is, you're building the brand is, I guess, your content essentially. So I don't know if you've worked with more content related business type things, but I wanted to ask, what advice would you give for the small businesses of content creators essentially? Where How do you think people can grow from that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. Let's see. I would say the first thing that comes to mind there is repurpose your content. So if you build one piece of content, you can use that in several different places. So, on your blog or your social media streams or a video or a curriculum or whatnot. It depends on your business, obviously. But a lot of people get stuck in, I need to make a specific piece of content for each and every little thing I'm doing. And they can, in fact, repurpose it or maybe just tweak it slightly. And it works perfectly fine. And it very well might be the first time someone is seeing that. So they're thinking, oh my gosh, it's going to be a repeat of things over and over. And it's not, because you're meeting people where they hang out and
Mm-hmm.
where they live. Um, and the other thing is, which goes back to MVP, is you might not need to make as much content as you think originally. Just get something out and build off of there. So it can be a
Mm-hmm.
very iterative process. Just get the ball rolling. The hardest part is starting and getting that initial inertia going. And once you do, you're like, oh, I've got this content and I can build off
Mm-hmm.
of that. And you get ideas and you get feedback and people are interacting with you. So I would say, just start, repurpose where you can, and after you start, 99% of the time, things will naturally unfold from there. You'll get an idea as you're creating that content. You'll get an idea from someone who's seen your content.
Mm-hmm. What do you suggest for people, and this goes for businesses too, I guess, when you need more feedback? Because
Hmm.
I think sometimes feedback can be a difficult one, especially when you're asking people to take time out of their day to, give you feedback, especially when there's nothing in return. um, because people are busy, or someone's, whether it's content and someone's listening to a podcast while driving, or you're using a software and you're taking notes and it thing pops up that says please give us feedback, and you just exit out of it. What do you suggest to help people get more feedback on their business or their content?
Yeah, I mean, friends and family, which is a double-edged sword because they'll do it because they like you, but they also might not be your target audience. But you can get some general, common sense feedback. Sometimes it's actually beneficial because you're like, hey, I need someone who is not a technologist to test this. And you're like, Grandma, come over here. Can you do this? Um, and then, like we talked about, network. If you have a little bit of a following, you can ask, like, hey, we're looking for beta testers, or hey, we're looking for people to run this trial, and you'll get to see our new functionality, or give them something for it if you can. So free access for a month, or lifetime something if they're the very first ones to use it. If you're in a position to give a little gift card, that gets a lot of traction. So any sort of reward, whether it's material or otherwise, maybe you get an early adopter badge or a tester, certification or anything, just to give them a little bit of incentive, to take the action you want. And again, I would try to make the testing as short and simple as possible, unless you need very thorough testing, in which case I would try to
Hmm.
reward them in a commiserate way. But people are often fine saying, I'll answer 5 questions. If you tell me it's going to be short and answer 5 questions, cool. If you're wanting me to sit down for 90 minutes and fill out an essay, you're going to get a lot of people dropping off that. So
Hmm.
really target, what do I want to know most about my initial content or about this business idea, and structure and frame up your questions so you really get that piece.
Okay, so you want the core of it, you want it to be short and sweet, and you want to provide some benefit that you'll actually do it.
Yeah. And again,
Okay.
if you can do a gift card, cool. I reply to ones where I get an Amazon gift card, but a lot of people just love, like, getting a badge or getting some sort of recognition, or even just, thank you for helping me get this off the ground. They like being in early, and the fact that they could be one of the first people to look at it or touch it, or help you with
Hmm.
it is enough. But give them kind of what they get out of it, by helping you test it.
Yeah. All right. So thank you, Emily, for, being on this episode and sharing your knowledge in the business industry. I think people are going to find a lot of value out of this, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and an honor being a guest on your show. So thank you very much. It was fun.